All right, let's jump right in. Today we're traveling back in time to 52 BC to the Gallic Wars. You've probably heard of Julius Caesar, the Roman general who was trying to conquer all of Gaul.
Right. And usually when we talk about Caesar, it's all victories and strategic brilliance. But today we're going to look at one of his big setbacks, his first real taste of defeat.
You mean the Battle of Gergovia?
Exactly.
So this is a major turning point.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But before we get into all that, I was just thinking, Gaul was this huge, mysterious land. What was it like before Caesar? What was the political landscape like?
Yeah, good question. Like, who are these Gauls?
Well, Gaul was basically made up of a bunch of independent tribes, each with their own chiefs and rivalries.
So it's pretty divided then.
Yeah, very divided. No unified nation, which Caesar was able to use to his advantage early on.
Oh, I see. So he used a divide and conquer strategy.
Exactly. He'd form alliances with one tribe and then use them to conquer another and so on.
Clever, but I bet that made those alliances pretty unstable.
Oh, absolutely. Very fragile. Always shifting, depending on who was going to benefit the most.
So those shaky alliances probably have something to do with what happened at Gergovia.
Totally. It's a huge piece of the puzzle. But first, we have to set the scene. Imagine this Gergovia, a fortified city perched on top of a massive hill.
How high are we talking?
1,200 feet high, with steep cliffs and narrow paths.
Oh, man. Just getting up there would be a nightmare, let alone fighting a battle.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Vercingetorix, the leader of the Gallic forces, was counting on. The guy was a strategic genius.
So he's the one who orchestrates Caesar's first big defeat.
Yep. He knew that the geography was his greatest weapon, and boy, did he use it.
So tell me, who was this Vercingetorix? Was he always this important leader?
It's really interesting, actually. He wasn't a king or anything, basically just a nobleman from a powerful tribe called the Arverni. But when Caesar started making his move, Vercingetorix saw the threat.
He saw that Caesar was picking them off one by one.
Right, so he started rallying the tribes, really emphasizing their shared Gallic identity.
Yeah, reminding them that they were Gauls before anything else.
Exactly. And he started winning. And with those early victories, more and more tribes started to join him.
So Caesar finally met his match.
He did. Suddenly Caesar wasn't fighting a bunch of disunited tribes anymore. Now he was facing a united Gallic front, and Vercingetorix was at the heart of it. This charismatic leader who seemed to know what Caesar was going to do next.
So back to Gergovia, we've got Caesar, this ambitious general who's used to winning, and we've got Vercingetorix, this rising star who's managed to unite the Gallic tribes. What happens next?
Well, Caesar decides to lay siege to Gergovia.
So basically starve them out.
Right, classic siege warfare. Cut off supplies, wait it out. It worked for him countless times before.
Makes sense. Why risk a full-on assault when you can just wait?
Yeah, but things didn't quite go according to plan this time.
I bet. What happened?
Well, Caesar underestimated a few things. First, Vercingetorix wasn't just sitting around inside the city. He was using the terrain, the cliffs and paths, to launch surprise attacks, disrupting supplies.
So he's turning the geography into a weapon.
Yeah, exactly. And, remember those fragile alliances we talked about?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Caesar had this really important alliance with the Aedui.
Oh, yeah, they were like his key allies, right?
Right, supplying troops and intel, everything. But then you've got Lucterius, an Aedui leader who wasn't so happy about the alliance.
He didn't trust Caesar.
No, he didn't. He saw Caesar as a conqueror, a threat. So he starts stirring things up, sowing seeds of discontent, playing on existing tensions.
So Caesar's got this enemy inside his own camp.
Basically. And it works. Lucterius gets the Aedui to revolt, and they switch sides, joining Vercingetorix.
Wow, that's a big blow. Now he's fighting a war on two fronts. Vercingetorix in Gergovia and a rebellious ally.
Total nightmare. It really pushed Caesar to his limits. He had to divide his forces, sending part of his army to deal with the Aedui rebellion.
He must have been furious.
Well, he managed to put down the rebellion, but it weakened his position at Gergovia. Now he's facing this larger Gallic force in this fortress that is just impossible to attack head-on.
I bet Caesar wasn't happy.
Not at all. But he was resilient. He doesn't give up easy. So he starts launching attacks, trying to draw Vercingetorix's forces out into open battle where the Romans would have the advantage.
But that didn't work.
No, Vercingetorix was too smart for that. He knew better than to give up his position, so he kept his forces inside the city, picking his battles, using hit-and-run tactics.
So the Romans were trapped.
Pretty much. And that's when things really start to unravel for Caesar. He starts taking heavy losses, including a lot of his centurions.
Centurions.
Yeah, the experienced officers like the backbone of the Roman army.
I can't imagine how demoralizing that must have been.
It was a huge turning point in the Gallic Wars. Not only was it a significant military defeat, but it damaged Caesar's reputation back in Rome. People started to question him.
So it was a political blow, too.
Exactly. It showed that Caesar wasn't invincible, that he could make mistakes. And for Vercingetorix, it solidified his position as the leader of the resistance. He'd proven that Caesar could be beaten, and that was very dangerous for Caesar.
So Caesar's got a tough situation on his hands. This is his first real defeat in Gaul. What does he do? Just pack up and head back to Rome?
Not Caesar, no. Retreat, well, yeah, definitely, especially after all the losses at Gergovia. But he wasn't going to just slink back to Rome defeated. Remember, he's a brilliant strategist and, even more importantly, a master of PR.
So he needs to make himself look good again.
Right, both on the battlefield and back home with the Senate.
So he needs to regain control, but how?
Well, the Aedui betrayal left a gap in his forces.
You mean like manpower?
Yeah, well, more specifically, cavalry.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
The Aedui were providing a lot of his horsemen.
Exactly. So he needs to replace them, and quickly.
Where does he turn? I mean, who else could he trust?
He looks north to the Germanic tribes. He knew they were fierce fighters, especially their horsemen.
He'd fought against them before.
I had. So he sends out these envoys, promises them land, gold, the chance to fight with the Romans.
I bet that was a tempting offer.
Oh, yeah. Many jumped at the chance. It was a chance to win glory, get paid, all that. So Caesar quickly has a new cavalry, ready to fill the gap left by the Aedui.
So it's almost like he's regrouping.
Right, adapting his strategy. But, what about Vercingetorix? He's not just sitting back celebrating his victory, is he?
I doubt it.
No, not at all. This victory at Gergovia, it really had a big impact on all of Gaul, like a beacon of hope, It showed everyone that Caesar wasn't invincible. And Vercingetorix uses this
to strengthen his own position.
Exactly. He brings more tribes together, uniting them under his leadership.
It sounds like things are heating up. Caesar's regrouping, Vercingetorix is uniting the Gauls. Feels like a big clash is coming.
It is. This all sets the stage for one of the most legendary battles in history, the Siege of Alesia.
Okay, so before we get into the battle itself, can you tell us about Alesia? What made it so important?
So imagine a fortified town nestled among these rolling hills at a crossroads. That was Alesia. Vercingetorix knows Caesar is out there, regrouping and planning his next move. So he chooses Alesia as his base.
A strategic choice.
Oh yeah, it was defensible, easy to supply, offered good visibility, a good spot.
Makes sense. But we all know Caesar isn't one to back down from a challenge. So how does he approach Alesia?
He doesn't make the same mistakes as Gergovia. He arrives with his legions, the new cavalry. But instead of attacking, he does something even more ambitious.
What does he do?
He builds a wall.
A wall?
Yeah, a massive siege wall, a fortification completely encircling Alesia.
Trying to trap Vercingetorix.
Right, and it's not just one wall, it's two.
A double wall.
A double wall. It's designed to trap Vercingetorix's forces inside and protect the Romans from any Gallic reinforcements.
That's a huge undertaking.
Massive. We're talking miles of trenches, wooden palisades, watchtowers, the whole 9 yards. Took weeks, maybe months to build.
So Caesar's basically saying to Vercingetorix, you're not going anywhere.
Exactly. It's a siege on an epic scale. Vercingetorix and his army are trapped.
So two brilliant military minds locked in this standoff. What happens next? How does the siege play out?
Well, things get pretty bad inside Alesia. Supplies run low, morale drops. Vercingetorix realizes he can't stay trapped forever. He sends messengers to the other Gallic tribes, begging for help.
Makes sense. He needs reinforcements to break out.
Right, and they answer his call. A massive Gallic relief force. We're talking hundreds of thousands of warriors.
Hundreds of thousands. That's incredible. So Caesar is now sandwiched between Vercingetorix inside Alesia and this huge relief force outside.
This is where it gets really interesting. Caesar can't abandon the siege, but he also can't ignore this new threat, so he has to adapt. Again.
What does he do?
He splits his forces. Part of the army stays to maintain the siege of Alesia, and he takes the rest to face the relief force.
Wow, he's fighting a war on two fronts again.
And it's a brutal fight. The Gauls are fighting desperately to free Vercingetorix, and they almost break through. But Caesar somehow manages to hold them off.
So he holds them back, but what about Vercingetorix? What's he doing while all this is going on?
Well, he sees this huge battle happening outside the walls and knows this is his chance. So he launches an attack from inside Alesia.
Trying to break through the weakened Roman lines?
Yeah, while they're busy fighting the relief force. It almost works.
It's a smart strategy.
It was. But, Caesar had anticipated this. He had reserves ready and led a counterattack himself, pushing back the Gauls.
Caesar seems to always be one step ahead.
He was a brilliant tactician. He was able to repel both attacks from inside and outside Alesia. But the fighting wasn't over. The Gallic relief force, even after the setback, kept pushing, trying to break through.
So what happens? Who breaks first?
It was a real test of endurance. Then, as the battle reaches its climax, Vercingetorix, he decides to gamble.
What does he do?
He orders his best cavalry unit to charge the Roman lines, a desperate, last-ditch effort to break the siege.
A classic cavalry charge.
Yeah, they almost made it too, smashed into the Roman fortifications. But Caesar had anticipated this and had his own cavalry reserves waiting, including those new Germanic horsemen.
Oh, so it all comes down to this, cavalry versus cavalry.
A brutal fight. Swords, shields, horses everywhere. But the Romans, their discipline and training, it wins out in the end. They push back the Gallic charge, crushing their hopes.
Vercingetorix must have been devastated.
It was a turning point. Their cavalry defeated, supplies running low, no hope of reinforcements. The situation inside Alesia, it becomes hopeless.
So what happens? Does Vercingetorix keep fighting?
No, he realizes it's over. But he makes a decision that will make him a legend. He decides to surrender. But not to just any Roman. He surrenders personally to Julius Caesar.
Wow, that's powerful. Surrendering to the very man he swore to defeat.
It really is. Vercingetorix, in full armor, mounts his horse and rides out of Alesia. Head held high, approaches Caesar's camp, dismounts, lays down his weapons, and surrenders.
What an ending. Alesia falls, Caesar is victorious, Vercingetorix is captured. What happens to him?
Vercingetorix, he's taken to Rome as a prisoner of war, a trophy of Caesar's victory. Held captive for 6 years. 6 years. Then he's paraded through the streets of Rome during Caesar's triumph, a public spectacle.
To humiliate him?
Yeah, to show Rome's power and the defeat of its enemies. And, well, sadly, that's not even the end. After the triumph, he's executed.
A tragic end for a man who fought so hard for his people.
It is. But despite his defeat, Vercingetorix became a legend, a symbol of Gallic resistance. Remembered for his courage, his brilliance, and for uniting the Gauls.
Yeah, it really is a powerful story. The reminder that even in defeat, there can be heroism.
Exactly. The Siege of Alesia is epic. It really sealed the fate of Gaul. But it also raises so many questions, like what were the long-term consequences of this Roman victory? What happens to Gaul under Roman rule?
Those are great questions. And that leads us perfectly into the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore the aftermath of the Gallic Wars, the Roman impact, and the legacy of this clash of civilizations. Okay, so Caesar is victorious. Gaul is under Roman control. What happens to the Gauls now? What's life like for them under Roman rule?
It's a time of massive change, a real culture clash. Remember, before Caesar, Gaul was all these separate tribes, each with their own traditions, laws, ways of life.
Right, not a unified nation.
No, not at all. They had a shared, Celtic heritage, but there were big differences between them. Sometimes even rivals, right?
And then Rome shows up with their legions, their laws. I'm guessing that didn't go over so well.
There was resistance for sure, yeah. Uprisings. But Rome was pretty good at putting those down. They had the military, the organization to enforce their rule.
So how did they govern Gaul? Did they just force their will on everyone?
It was kind of a mix. The Romans were pragmatic. They knew they couldn't just rule by force. They needed to create a system that would work for them, but also make the region stable and prosperous.
So a bit of both.
Yeah, bit of carrot and stick. And a key part of this was Romanization.
Romanization.
Yeah, basically spreading Roman culture, language, all that throughout Gaul.
So they wanted to make Gaul more Roman.
Exactly. They built Roman-style cities with forums, temples, baths, urban planning, Roman style.
A Roman makeover.
More than a makeover. It was about reshaping Gaul, making it part of the Roman world. And it wasn't just buildings. They brought in Roman law, a standardized legal system.
Was that better for the Gauls or just a way for Rome to control them?
It was definitely a way to control, but Roman law, was about order and justice. Provided a framework for resolving things, protecting property, all that. So yeah, there were benefits, but it was all under Roman rule, of course.
It's like they got the benefits but lost some freedom.
Right. And language was a big part of it too. Latin, the language of Rome, it became the language of administration, law, everything. A lot of Gauls, they adopted it, which eventually evolved into French.
Wow, so French comes from Latin because of the Romans?
In a way, yeah. It's interesting how these things happen, isn't it? But Gallic culture, It didn't disappear overnight.
So it was more like a mix, Roman and Gallic.
Yeah, exactly. A cultural melting pot. You see it everywhere. Art, religion. The Gauls even adopted Roman gods and goddesses, mixed them with their own.
Interesting. So it's not a total erasure. It's more like a fusion.
Right. And that's what makes this period so fascinating. It wasn't just about conquest. It was about exchange, adaptation. A new Gallo-Roman identity emerged.
But Roman rule, it wasn't all good, was it?
No, of course not. The Romans, they could be brutal. They exploited Gaul's resources, took their taxes, imposed their will. There were injustices for sure. Important to remember that.
Right. It's always complicated.
Yeah, history is messy. The Roman conquest, it was a huge turning point. Reshaped Europe, new cultures, a lasting impact on Western civilization.
And Caesar, he's at the center of it all. These campaigns, all these victories, how did this change him? Not just as a general, but as a person.
It's hard to overstate the impact of the Gallic Wars. It's where he, honed his skills. Military, political, all of it.
He wasn't that old when he started all this, was he?
Early 40s. Ambitious. Wanted power. And Gaul, it gave him the platform to show off his talents and get rid of anyone in his way.
And his victories, they weren't just military, were they?
No, definitely political too. Each victory, it just added to his prestige back in Rome.
So while conquering Gaul, he's also playing politics.
Oh, absolutely. He used his victories to boost his image back home, portrayed himself as the savior of Rome, the strong man.
The guy who could fix things.
Exactly. And this is how the Gallic Wars, they tie into this bigger story of Rome, the fall of the Republic, the rise of the empire.
So it's all connected.
It is. The Gallic Wars were more than just battles. They were a step in Rome's transformation from republic to empire.
So Caesar's conquests in Gaul, they helped pave the way for the Roman Empire.
You could say that. His conquests, his ruthlessness, it all contributed to the events that led to the end of the Republic. A new era. The era of emperors.
We've covered so much: Gergovia, Alesia, the impact on Rome and Gaul, so much history. As we wrap up this deep dive, is there one thing you want our listeners to take away from all of this?
I think the biggest thing is history is never simple. It's always more complicated than it seems. It's about ambition, conquest, resistance, cultures clashing. The Gallic Wars, it had these huge consequences, shaped civilizations, still impacts us today.
Well said. And to our listeners, I hope this deep dive has made you curious about this fascinating period of history. Keep exploring, keep asking questions.